We are halfway down on my way home. The trolley car stopped and a woman got into the trolley and she holds up one shoe and she said, "Look here, everybody." She says, "I've just been at Macy's," and it happened to be a Jewish store, and I could only get one shoe. All the others were gone. But I have this shoe here, and I want you to know, when we've killed all the Jews in Germany, I'm having it gilded and put in my china closet. And everybody clapped. And I'm sitting there. Let me start from the beginning, which I don't remember. I was born in Germany, and we lived in a nice area in a big town, Frankfurt am Main, which is a well-known city in Germany. My father had a business, and he was well known all over. One of my great-grandfathers was at that time, I didn't know what you called a lawyer, but somebody who did the books and everything for this German lord. He didn't like his Jewish name, so he changed our name, to his family name that had various names, and his name was Engelbert, which is strictly German. And that's how I ended up with the German name of Engelbert, Ilse Engelbert. My father got a letter from Hitler thanking him for being such a good soldier and, got pension and everything from Germany yet. He didn't know Engelbert wasn't a Jewish name, and he didn't know anything about it, and he thanked him for being such a good German. I was an only child. My parents lived in a very nice neighborhood. All my friends were nobody asked your religion. One of our closest friends were not Jewish. They had a boy my age, and I grew up with him. His name was Georgie. And we were always together, and when we were old enough, we would ride our bicycles together and so on. And for Christmas, we were always invited to their house to help decorate the Christmas tree and exchange gifts. We have dinner with them, and on Hanukkah, they would come to our house, and we all lit the candles together, so we were always together. And when Hitler got into power, it still attacks me. Georgie thought he couldn't, lie to his chief there, his Boy Scout leader, his Nazi leader, and who came in the uniform and all that. It was, like here by the Boy Scouts. And so he said, "Well, I tell you the truth. My parents were upset, really, because they felt not everybody is a bad person and is decent, and we have good friends." They said, "This is so stupid, what this Hitler wants to do. After all, we all believe in one God, so what would the difference be?" And they felt that it's not fair what they're doing to those people. And he said, "Your parents said that?" He said, "Don't believe that." Well, would you believe it? When they rounded up the Jewish men, they rounded up Georgie's parents, who were never heard from again. They were sent to a camp. I found all that out after the war. Nothing was ever normal anymore, because you were always afraid what would happen. You know, we lived in a neighborhood where there was not a section that was Jewish. It was just a normal neighborhood. So I had a lot of friends that belonged in the school, and they called me at night and said, look, it can't last forever. When it's over, it'll be like always. But we better not talk now, you know. One night, this was before Kristallnacht, my father had a call from somebody who was a big Nazi already. I mean, known. He had made speeches and he was known. He was also in the business, in the Nazi party, and had a big job there. And he called him in the middle of the night and he said, look, they're going to round up the Jews and put them into labor camps. You better get out of town, so when they come and want to round you up, that you're not home. And my father always had a hernia, and he took medication for it. He wouldn't go into a hospital. So that was the night when my mother insisted that he go and take care of that hernia. And she called the hospital where she knew somebody and told them, could he bring him in the morning for an operation to have the hernia operated on. And he didn't want to, but she insisted. She was a tough cookie, my mother. She really was. He went in the morning to the hospital and had the operation. And at night, they started rounding up the Jews. This was, you know, in 1938 already, when Kristallnacht started November the 10th. And that was the night of the broken glass. Crystal is, you know, glass, broken glass. The Nazi party arrested 30,000 German Jewish men, looted Jewish stores and burned down 400 synagogues. This was a night that was supposed to have been spontaneous, but later on you found out that was all planned, you know.
You stayed?
We had to.
Why?
Because otherwise they would have looked for my father, and they wouldn't have believed us if we said he left the house and we don't know where he is. They came to our house later on to look for him. See, they had you all written down what you do and all that. And meanwhile, the schools where I had gone to school with in our neighborhood, which wasn't a Jewish school, I had to get out, and I had to go to a Jewish school. Once the neighborhood started to change, I was in, I guess, second grade by that time. We got a new teacher in, and he came into our classroom and he raised his hand in the Nazi salute, Heil Hitler, and everybody had to get up to raise their hand and salute Hitler. Heil Hitler meant Heil, hero, our, you know, Hitler. And of course I didn't get up. So he said, get up and greet the Führer. I said, no, I can't do that. He said, are you Jew? I said, yes. He said, go to the back of the class and nobody ever talked to her again. So I had to get up and go and sit in the back of the class. I started to cry. It never happened to me before. Nobody ever did that before. But Hitler got into power now and all that. And I was a kid yet. So I had to sit in the back of the class. And as I walked by my friends, they all said, it's going to blow over. My mother said, it's not going to last. I said, I'm not going to go back to school. My mother said, this is by tomorrow it'll be blown over a little bit. Forget it. My mother found a Jewish school, not in our neighborhood, across town. So in the morning I got to the trolley car to go across town, and that's when Kristallnacht happened. I saw trucks with men loaded on it. They were already shipped to camps, working camps, not concentration camps, but, stores, Jewish stores, they were broken into. The whole place looked like crazy. It was like a carnival. They smashed the Jewish stores' windows, and they carried everything out that was possible to take out. And I'm sitting in the trolley car and scared stiff. And I saw the synagogues burning. I happened to see our synagogue, the Börnerplatz synagogue, burning when we passed downtown. I came to school, and everybody was standing outside already, and my teachers said, "Get back onto the trolley car immediately, don't talk to anybody, and go straight home. And we are going to close the school, and don't come back." I never went back. That was it. They burned the whole school. I mean, it was crazy. Little kids, before they went to school, they had to march with their Hitler's, up their hands saluting Hitler. We are halfway down on my way home. The trolley car stopped, and a woman got into the trolley, and she holds up one shoe, and she said, "Look here, everybody." She says, "I've just been at Macy's," and it happened to be a Jewish store. And I could only get one shoe. All the others were gone. But I have this shoe here, and I want you to know, when we've killed all the Jews in Germany, I'm having it gilded and put in my china closet. And everybody clapped. And I'm sitting there, right? Can you imagine how I felt? And that was the people at the time. Well, I came home. When I came into our neighborhood, and I ran home, and my mother waited for me and opened the door, and she let me in, and she said, "We're closing the door. We don't open it to anybody. Daddy isn't home. We don't know where he is. He was in the hospital yet. That's all we knew." So we closed the door, and we had dinner, and after dinner, it's not easy to live through it. After dinner, my mother said, "Well, you take it easy, you go to bed early." And there was a knock at the door. My mother said, "Don't open the door, don't say we're at home." And some more knocking, and the people calling outside, "Please open the door immediately, otherwise we have to break it down." So mother didn't do anything yet, so they started knocking, like breaking it down. So she went over, and they said, "Open the door." And there were about 3 teenagers outside, but 17, 18 years old. And they said, "Where's your husband?" She said, I don't know. He left the house and didn't come back. I have no idea where he would be. So they said, is he hiding? So they took my mother and threw her against the wall. And she said, no, he's not in the house. So they pushed her aside and clapped her, hit her a few times, and said, let's have a look. So she didn't say anything. They had hit her against the wall anyhow. That's where she was standing. And I was in my bedroom. She had said to me before when they started knocking, she said, go in your bedroom and get in bed. So I was in my bedroom and I heard them outside. So the next thing I heard was they're looking all over, and they were going up to the where we had all kinds of stuff stored in the attic, you know. And the next thing I heard, when I was in my bedroom, this tremendous noise. What they had done went like this, and took all these glass jars and threw them on the ground from the shelves that were looking for my father, and they didn't find him upstairs. So they were mad, and they broke anything that was broken up in the attic. Then they came downstairs and went into the basement. You have no idea what that looked like, what they did to me. And of course my father wasn't down there. And anything that could be broken was being broken downstairs. And then they came upstairs. And then they came to my bedroom. And when I heard all that noise and everything, I pulled the blankets over my head and I pretended I was sleeping, and I pulled my pillows from under me and pulled the blankets off me and asked where my father was. And I said, he's not here. I don't know where he is, but he left the house. And of course they didn't believe me, and they beat me up, and they broke part of my arm, or my wrist rather, and didn't believe me. It wasn't easy. England heard what went on in Germany, and they decided, well, the world knew now what went on, and they said, you know, this is not going to last, and we have to do something, and all that was in all the papers in Europe, England, France, and so on. So word came around that England, the government decided they want to take in 10,000 children. Hitler didn't want to get such a bad name, and that he would decide England could take in, if they want to take 10,000 children. When word came out that England was going to take in 10,000 children, and it was like a lottery, because it was from 3 or 4 countries that were going to send children to England. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria, and Germany. They picked kids, you know, out of those that had applied. And I wasn't going to go anyhow. There was one other girl from my hometown, and we lived in a big city like Philadelphia. And I was an only child. I didn't want to leave my parents, and I didn't know a word of English, and I didn't know anybody in England to take me in. One of the girls from my hometown was also going, had applied. So we met, and we decided neither one of us were going to go. And we decided we were going to run away. Well, we did. The Jewish organization who had arranged all that, they looked for us and they found us. We were hiding in a park. But they found us. My father didn't want me to go because he was a veteran and all that, and he said, you know, the world knows now what goes on, what else can they do, blah, blah, blah. My mother said, that's okay, but once it's over, we'll pick her up and she'll come back home, and it's like it always was. She was the one who wanted me to go. Can you imagine? I was 11 years old, to leave to go to a country where I don't know a soul and I don't know the language. The day came, May the 24th, I think it was May 24th, 1939, when my name came up to go to England with a Kindertransport. And as I said, I didn't want to go, and the other girl who also was going from my hometown wasn't going to go. There were kids from all the neighborhoods, you know, who were going to go. But the girl that I knew, her parents said, well, let's wait for a few more weeks, and maybe we can all go, or we go to America together. They had family here in America. And I found out after the war that she and her parents were deported to concentration camp in Germany and never made it out. So she didn't make it. They took me to the station, and I had to pick my suitcase. My mother was the one who saved my life. She was the only one who wanted me to go. The parents had to stand behind a fence. We were early, and my parents were up front. So I could really see them all the time, you know. I still see it to this day. My grandmother at the time in 1939 was 91 years old. This was in 1939. And you were not allowed to take any jewelry out. And when I went over to say goodbye to my grandmother, who was 91 in 1939, he took this little thing, Moses with the Ten Commandments, and it has a Jewish prayer, the Shema, in the back. And she slipped it into my pocket, and she whispered into my ear, listen to this, always wear this. I've worn it all my life. I got it from my grandmother when I was born, and she told me, she whispered into my ear, always wear it, never take it off. I wore it all my life because I got it from my grandmother when I was born. She got it from her grandmother, and her grandmother got it from her grandmother. So that must be over 200, 300 years old. And I always wear it. And you know what? She took it off, and I still feel guilty because she died in a concentration camp in Auschwitz. She was pushed into a concentration camp yet, sometime in 1941. And as we started to go towards the train, I looked back, there was a lot of commotion, and my father, who always walked with his cane and was shot in the knee, you know, he was crippled. He had jumped over the fence where they were standing behind, and he lost his cane, and he was, crying like you saw the blood running down his face, and he was screaming, "Don't take my baby, don't take my baby." And he jumped over the fence to run after our walking, and he fell, and that was the last time I saw him. Never saw him again. I have no family left at all. Nobody. Only my children. And got on the train, and we had to sit in compartments, and the Nazi stormtroopers who came on the train with us walked in front of our doors, of the compartments, to see that we didn't start any problems, any trouble. And if we had to go to the bathroom or anything like that, we called her auntie, a woman with us, and she had to get permission to take us to the bathrooms. We first had to go from Germany to Holland, and from Holland to the crossing to England. And when we got into England, we had to get on a train to go to, we had to go to London, to where they would put us with foster parents. And there are people, and they called out my name, and a couple came over and introduced themselves. They made the application to take me in. The Levins, the Jewish people, who had no kids of their own, and they were going to take in foster kids. They lived in London itself, in a very nice neighborhood. It was like I was a stranger in London. Couldn't speak English, and I couldn't converse with them. It wasn't easy for them because I cried a lot. I missed my parents, I felt strange, and I couldn't talk. And things happened. Little by little, I learned through the Yiddish, I learned some English. They both went to work in the morning, and I became a glorified maid. I was 12 years old. Every once in a while, she was a teacher. She would take me to school, and I learned a little bit of English and so on. And I did learn. Things, such crazy things that can happen to you, when you don't least expect it. We went to Hyde Park, and she took pictures of me, and all of a sudden, policeman came and grabbed my hand and said, "What are you doing there?" And he heard my voice, and he knew by my accent. He said, it didn't sound right. So he said, "What are you doing?" And I didn't know what I was taking. I was standing there, and she was taking my pictures. And little did we know that in back of me was a big walk, and there was troop transport, British troop transport, with soldiers and a tank going. And she took pictures of me, but she got the back with troop transport. And the police came and grabbed the camera, and he said, "What are you doing?" And when he heard my accent and my speech, he said, "What are those pictures for?" I couldn't lie to the policeman. I said, "For my parents." "Where are your parents?" "Well, they're still in Germany, but I'm going to send the pictures to New York, and his cousins were going to send them to Germany." And 2 days later, I was picked up as a German spy, and I was interned into camp for Germans. The next thing I knew, I was assigned to a room with a woman, and the first thing she did, I had to share a room with her. She took a picture of Hitler and put it in our room. She was interned as a German spy.
How long were you there for?
Well, that was a story in itself. All in all, 9 months. See, the Levins, my foster parents, made applications to get me out. But there was a war on, there was a lot going on, so it didn't go through so 1, 2, 3. So they collected signatures that I wasn't a spy and I was my whole life story and all that. I didn't see them anymore, ever.
Ever?
Ever, never. I was not in contact with them anymore. She had come also out from internment, and we both came to the estate in Manchester, which was a big estate. I'd enjoyed sharing a room with 5 other girls in that estate, and Herbie was one of the kids that slept downstairs, and I slept upstairs with the 5 girls, and that's how we met. We were both kids yet. We both had to start working in factories to make, there was a war, to work in factories. Boys had to make like cases for bombs to put in, Girls had to learn how to make uniforms. And we had to go at night in the factory and walk around and see that all the windows and doors and everything was shut tight. Nobody would smuggle in, that spies wouldn't smuggle into the factory and so on. We walked in to see that all the doors were closed and everything. And there was an air raid going on. The Germans were bombing, There wasn't a peace yet. And I walked into that factory. I was fire watching, they called us. And I walked in, and a big rat jumped there was two people that had to watch, and I was together with Mary, who also was working, and we walked into that place, and a huge rat jumped at us. And even so, there was an air raid on, we didn't give a damn. We were more scared of that rat. I'd never seen a big rat like that in my life. Never saw a rat before. And that thing was hungry, and it ran after us, and and so we ran out of the place. I'm not going to stay with the rat in the same building. So we ran out, and we just about came down the steps from the factory when our factory had hit and was bombed, and we were thrown in the air, and we fell on the dirt near there, and we were covered, and I was covered. Well, my girlfriend Mary too, and we were covered with soot, and as a matter of cracked my wrist at the time, but I didn't know, it just hurt and was hanging like this. But well, then the police came, and they took us in, and they interviewed us, and I thought we would end up in jail, but they didn't. They examined me, and they cleaned me up, and we never got punished, that we left the factory. And so I was saved. They could have locked me up forever. So that saved my life. If we would have stayed, they told us later on if we would have stayed in the factory, we would have been killed. And then the war was over, and the people who had donated their estate wanted their estate back. So we decided, Herbie and I decided we wanted to start living together. And eventually we wanted to get married. I was 15 at the time. Herbie was 16 going 17. We couldn't afford to rent an apartment. We couldn't get any anyhow. So we rang doorbells. We rang a doorbell, and the woman opened the door, wanted what we wanted. And we said whether she has an apartment to rent, that we would like to, we need an apartment, we have nowhere to live. So she said, well, where did we live before? We told her. So she said, oh, are you those refugee children? I said, yes. So she said, well, you come in. And she took us into her kitchen, and she made us a cup of tea. It was in England. Made us a cup of tea, and we had to tell her our life story. And she said, you'll stay right here. We'll find you something. That was Mrs. Hickson. And Mrs. Hickson had a big sofa, pull-out sofa, in her living room. And that became our bedroom. So yes, Mrs. Hickson saved our life. Well, we got a job, and Mrs. Hickson gave us dinner and at night, and we paid her. And eventually, we moved together. Mrs. Hickson became our foster mother. She was great. He was 18 and I was going on 17. He was a little past 18 and I was going to be 17. After Germany lost the war, of course they needed German-speaking people to go back to Germany to be interpreters for the American army, looking for Nazis that went underground and that changed their names and so on. So, since neither one of us knew what happened to our family, our parents, we both happened to be only children, but he also had his whole family over there. And we decided we'll go and join the army to go to Germany as interpreters. So we made applications and we learned our story, and they were very happy to accept us. And whether they would take us as German interpreters and with civil censorship. And they gave us a stiff test, and I never thought I'd make it. But believe it or not, I passed the test, and they took me, and I had to sign that I would be willing to stay in the army for 3 years. And I was issued a uniform, and before you knew it, I was in the army. I was a soldier. So we were accepted into the American army. We were issued uniforms, and we went back as an American army soldiers. As a matter of fact, I interpreted big Nazis who went into hiding and tried to smuggle money out to go to South America and so on. Also mail that was written, they were writing to each other how they, how they could smuggle stuff out and which way to go without being caught by the Americans and so on. And I caught a big Nazi, I don't know whether you ever heard his name, Werner von Braun. I interpret so many people, but he was one of them, and he told me that, he was a survivor, and He lost most of his family too, but he didn't know what happened to them and all that. I had quite an interesting life that way. And, well, I was in Germany for many, many years. So many people remembered my parents. My father was a very, very well-known businessman, you know. They remembered my parents very well, and they came out of the woodwork. And they all of a sudden became our friends. And after all, we had uniforms on, we were part of the American Army. And one of the women contacted me, and I knew her name. And she had heard, I was in the newspaper, you know, about my story and all that. And she had heard about me, and she contacted me. And she said, I don't know whether you're interested in getting together with me, but I have an interesting story to tell you. And I was friends with your parents even after, you know, Hitler came into power and Hitler, and nobody knew about it. We only talked to each other in the middle of the night. And she said, I would like you to tell you what, you know, what your mother told me. So I said, okay. After all, I was in American uniform. I was an American by that time. And so I met her, and I came to her house, and it was strange. It was like old times, you know. So I made a date with her. I trusted her, and I made a date with her that I would meet her. So one night I went over to her house, and she told me she has a very interesting story to tell me. I had called her when I knew they were deporting the Jewish people, and I said, if there's anything you want me to save in case you come back or in case Ilse comes back, maybe you can hide it in one of your closets or something. And I'd be willing to take that chance. So, one fine day, we made the date, and she brought me some stuff over, and she said, now I would like you to come with me to the garden. And she took me to her garden. She said, I have a few things that Susie brought over to me, and she put the stuff in, and it had a bracelet, my mother's golden bracelet, and a gold ring, and also a little necklace. But this I showed you, that was for my grandmother. Now this was a little, and lots of pictures that are in the book that he put also in that box. She said, I took and we put it all in this aluminum container, and I took it in my garden, and we dug it 4 feet under into the ground, and I put a tree on top of it. I would have never had that picture if she wouldn't have saved it in that little aluminum container. I went back to my hometown, Frankfurt, and I found out that my parents were deported with a concentration, when they were in a concentration camp, they were deported to a concentration camp that Germany had taken over part of Russia. And they built a camp in Minsk, Russia. And that's where they died. And now in my hometown, Frankfurt, there's a big wall were all the names of everybody who was deported to that camp in Minsk in Russia from my hometown, and including my parents. And my husband's family was also deported to a concentration camp and died in a concentration camp. He was also an only child. So we had a life that's unbelievable. Well, we worked for the American Army, and
What was a normal day like for your
like
job?
any soldier, you know, we went to our offices and we got papers where we were going to go and what we should expect, whether we have interpretations and whether we have to write stuff. So it was like any officer. So I was an American who studied German and who was going to go back to America to be in the university and later on, you know, tell stories about Germany and that I was in the army there and all that. After the war, Herbie had an uncle and aunt here in Philadelphia. And they decided, why don't you come to America? It's about time you get out of Europe. And at that time, this was after the war, Herbie decided, let's get out of Europe and let's go to America. So he wrote to his uncle and aunts, we're ready to come to America. How about it? And if I bring my friend? So they said, no, you have to be married. So we decided we're getting married. So we were 17 at that time. So we got married in England. We joined a Jewish organization and they made the arrangements for us and we got married. And we came to Philadelphia and they picked us up. And Herbie promised me, I'll save enough money. If you don't like America, we go back to England. I had all my friends in England. I grew up in England, you know. Well, I came and his uncle and aunt, they're wonderful to us. They treated us like their kids. And we both found jobs here. And he joined Temple. Well, he later on became a research chemist. And I went to college with him for 1 year. So we became citizens of Philadelphia. When I was in the Army, I had worked for the American Army, and they taught me to make uniforms, you know. So I went into a factory here to make clothes. And once I started in college and all that, I became a fashion designer. And I got a couple of big jobs with big firms. Well, we got a house. We made enough money to buy ourselves a house. And I became pregnant. And I had my first child, my daughter Shelley, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania now and is a dentist and doing very well. And my other daughter, who lives in Maryland and has two grandsons. I have two grandsons. And she is also a science teacher at a high school in Maryland. It wasn't a dull life, that's for sure.